Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. When I was a senior in high school, which would have been in 2007, I was contacted out of the blue one day by a random guy on MySpace. I vaguely recognized him, but didn't really know him. He told me that he knew me from school and that I had tutored him in math a couple of times. This should have been my first red flag. I hate math, and I've never tutored anyone in it. I told him he was mistaken, but I tried to be nice, and we struck up a friendly conversation. Soon, the guy, Brian, started talking to me at school. It started off pretty innocently. He was giving me more attention than I wanted, but I was flattered and didn't think much of it. At the time, he was a couple of years younger than me, and I figured he had developed a crush on me, mainly because we were both kind of odd compared to the other kids in our high school. It was a very small school. My graduating class had about 40 people, and we were two of a small number of alternative kids. He was pretty emo, while I tended more toward punk. Both of us loved My Chemical Romance. I feared he was just into me because there weren't many other girls with similar interests. Before long, he started waiting for me at my locker every day, between every class. He started following me around before school and during lunch. He even started coming to my performances. I was in drama and choir. I tried to be polite but began avoiding him. I would go to the local grocery store to eat lunch, even though it was more expensive, just because underclassmen weren't allowed to leave campus. The situation continued to escalate to the point where he was harassing me anytime I failed to avoid him. If he caught me at my locker, he would say explicit things, telling me what he wanted to do to me. He even told me that when he was with his girlfriend, he wished she were me. At homecoming, he left his girlfriend waiting awkwardly while he came to tell me that he really wanted us all to get together. Luckily, my girlfriends were with me and came over as soon as they noticed him talking to me, which made him scurry away. As quickly as it started, it was over. One day, he stopped showing up at school. I was relieved, but curious. After about a month of him being gone, my friend mentioned him in front of my dad, who was also the principal of my high school. My dad questioned me about what had happened, and I ended up telling him the whole story. He seemed really troubled. I asked him what was wrong, and he explained why Brian had been absent from school. Apparently, not long after homecoming, Brian had strapped some fireworks to a cat and set them off. The cat exploded, and Brian laughed. He got caught and was sent to juvie, and his parents committed him to a psychiatric facility. After he was released, I don't know what happened to him after that. When I was a freshman in high school, I met Alex. Now, 10 years later, I couldn't tell you why I was so drawn to him or why I got so attached. He was homely, odd, and quite frequently smelled bad. There was a darker undercurrent that ran beneath his surface, and I thought I saw an unspoken sadness that matched mine. Maybe as a naive 15-year-old, I had the stereotypical "we can save each other from our pain" fantasy. He wasn't the only boy giving me attention at the time. In fact, he barely gave me any, since he played hot and cold, emphasis on the cold, but he was the one I wanted. Every time I would start to pull away and give up because he was clearly uninterested, he would pop up, calling me cute and making comments about how seeing me brightened his day. Then, he would be back to pursuing someone else. I was 15, naive, and hurt, but still, I finally had enough. So I decided I was done. He caught wind of this and ended up asking me to be his girlfriend later that same day. I was caught off guard, but thought, finally, he must have just needed time to make a move. He and I dated for 2 years, and he was a hurricane the entire time. One example, his phone would be off for days at a time. He rarely went to school, and I just wouldn't hear from him. I would finally call his mom because I was worried about not hearing from him for 3, 4, or even 5 days, and she would tell me she hadn't seen him either. When he finally turned his phone back on, he would spit venom at me, calling me crazy because I spammed his phone. I would be in tears, trying to explain that I was worried because I hadn't heard from him in days, and neither had his mother. He would then call me a few other names, hang up on me, and turn his phone off again. The abuse came in many forms, but disappearing and then cussing me out when I voiced how uncomfortable it made me was his favorite. I kept trying to break up with him. Whenever I did, suddenly, he would call me, crying and saying that I was the love of his life and that he was going to end his life if I left him. After 2 years, I finally had enough and ended it for good. I told him I was done and ignored his fruitless threats. School was out for the summer, so he couldn't find me there, which meant he kept showing up at my house, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, it didn't matter. He would toss bits of bark that my mom had in a planter in the front yard at my bedroom window. He would sit there for a long time, trying to get me to talk to him. I didn't know what to do. I thought he would give up and that it would be okay soon. One day, I was walking home from work. I was a block away from my house, and Alex came sidling up next to me in his car, pleading with me to talk to him. I told him I had nothing more to say. "Then let me talk, please," he begged, crying. I had no intention of getting back together with him, but I still hated seeing him hurt. I agreed to let him say what he wanted for closure. I sat in the car and told him to talk. He started babbling incoherently and kept trying to make me feel bad for abandoning him. I told him the conversation was over, and I was leaving. He locked the doors, and as I went to manually push the lock up on my door, he grabbed my arm and told me I wasn't leaving. I panicked. I smacked him and shoved him away from me, scrambling out of the car and running the rest of the block home. He continued to lurk, spamming my inbox and driving by my house and place of employment. I ended up rebounding and started dating someone new, who was Alex's complete opposite. He made me feel happy and light. However, once Alex got wind of this, he flipped out. The calls and texts increased, both in frequency and in the level of mania. He started hanging out right outside the store where I worked. It was a small store in the mall, so I could see him just standing there, staring at me. Management had to call mall security a few times, but he always came back. Eventually, his texts became threatening. He started saying things like how he hoped my new boyfriend was prepared and that he was willing to go to jail to have me. My mom panicked, believing I was on the verge of being kidnapped or assaulted. We had gone to the cops a couple of times, but they said they couldn't do anything because he technically hadn't broken any laws. We took the threatening messages to them, and they said they would start filing a restraining order and go warn him that he couldn't come near or talk to me, or he would be in violation of the order of protection. He kept showing up anyway. One night, around midnight, the doorbell rang. My mom was confused and asked if I was expecting anyone. I told her no. She opened the door, and there on the front step was a card, a rose, and a burning candle. We glanced up and down the street but didn't see anyone. We were immediately spooked because there wasn't enough time for him to ring the doorbell and get out of sight. You could see a long way down both sides of the street, unless he was hiding in the trees along the house. This went on for a while. He kept following me and showing up at my work, which meant he kept getting visits from the cops. Even his friends got involved and started threatening me for what I was doing to him. Eventually, the order of protection was placed, and all at once, everything stopped. But my paranoia and fear lasted a long time after that. In all honesty, I've had a lot of creepy encounters and known a lot of normal people who ended up doing bad things. Sometimes I feel like I'm cursed to make friends with rough edges. This whole situation started when I was a sophomore in high school. One day, I showed up at school and noticed a new boy in my class. I was your typical goth girl, and this guy was a teenage bad boy dream, piercings, leather jacket, reading some sort of obscure novel. I was hooked at first sight. I introduced myself, and soon enough, we were dating. He will be referred to as X for the rest of the story. Now, a little background: I was brought up in an alcoholic parents' home. There were many times I was living by myself or with a friend because my parent was in the hospital. Despite the chaos in my life, I still managed to go to school every day and pull decent enough grades. However, after one too many times of being left to live alone for 2+ months, I decided I didn't want to go home to an empty house. I asked X if I could live with him since he lived closer to school. He and his parents happily welcomed me into their home. At this point in the relationship, maybe 5 months in, we were phasing out of the puppy love stage, and I was starting to notice some serious red flags. X was very emotional and had started cutting regularly. His parents were heavy drug users. There were times I would try to talk to X, but he would literally stare off into space, not noticing my existence. He was never mean or abusive towards me, but I could definitely tell something was unhinged in him. When we started living together, it became evident that something was very, very wrong. He began telling me he thought he was possessed by a demon and couldn't control himself. We both spiraled into moderate drug usage. I started skipping school, and he started seeing more demons. In all honesty, I hadn't realized what a hole I had dug myself into by living with him. One night, we ended up falling asleep after smoking a bowl and watching a movie. It was a big house, and we were living in the garden-level basement, 2 or so floors below his parents and siblings. Around midnight, I was awoken by the most frightening screech I've ever heard. X was right next to me in bed, contorting, convulsing, and screaming bloody murder. At first, I thought it was a seizure. I've had friends with seizures before, so I didn't interfere, only looking for one of our cell phones to call 911. I got up out of bed, and he looked me dead in the eye. The blood drained from my veins. Never have I seen such hate. Everything seemed to happen in flashes from there. He never broke eye contact as he slowly rose from the bed, almost like a marionette on a set of strings pulled up with sunken shoulders. A half-smile formed on his face as his body twitched. He started walking toward me. I can't describe how terrified I was. Cornered in the room opposite the door, I felt my ears swell and ring. He started screeching at me, coming within a centimeter of my face, never breaking his gaze. I started pushing him, yelling at him to cut it out, but it was like trying to push a stone statue. He wouldn't move. He finally started talking, ranting about the demon and not making a single bit of sense. As bizarre as it was, I knew he was having some sort of mental episode. I truly did fear for my life and knew I had to escape. Suddenly, I felt as though I was sucked back into the moment, and my senses became incredibly acute. I noticed the window we had cracked open earlier. I pushed the window up, punched through the screen, and climbed out while he stood silently staring at me. I'm pretty sure I stayed outside for an hour, hyperventilating before I decided to ring the doorbell. One of his parents answered, very confused, and set me up with a blanket on the couch on the first floor, with no questions asked. In the morning, X came up and acted as if nothing had happened. No matter how much I pestered him about it, it was as if it had all been a bad dream. I made arrangements to stay with another friend that day and broke up with X a week later, once I was able to face him again. Sometimes I wonder if it had been some sort of sick joke to get me out of his house or the relationship. But I watched, unshocked, in the years after as he fell into severe drug abuse and mental illness. At one point, I went to a school counselor and told them how worried I was for him, but it only made him hold a grudge against me. After everything that had happened, I really started to feel sorry for him and sort of weirdly forgave him for what he did. He tried contacting me a few times after everything, but as the years went by, I heard less and less. The last thing I heard was that he was addicted to meth and living on the streets. This goes back to when I was 15, a sophomore in high school. I had a few friends and would walk by myself to and from most of my classes because small talk made, and still does make, me nervous, thanks to some anxiety issues. I was walking to class one day when this guy, we'll call him Creeper, came out of nowhere and started walking next to me. He was a bit too close for comfort, so I moved over, but he followed. He was so close that his arm was brushing against my shoulder. For context, I'm 5 feet 1 inch and 93 pounds, and this guy was at least 6 feet 0 inches, 280 pounds, and probably a year or two older. I had some bad experiences with strange men in the past, so I was getting pretty uneasy. He finally decided to introduce himself. "Hey, you're Donna, right?" Of course, I was taken aback since I had no clue who this dude was and had never seen him before. "Do I know you?" I asked. What he said next gave me chills and still creeps me out to this day. "No, but I know you." Just like that, he turned and walked away. I kid you not, he actually said that. The next morning, I was sitting with my friends waiting for the first bell to ring. I pointed him out to them and asked who he was. They didn't know him either. The bell rang, and we all went our separate ways. I stuck my headphones in my ears and turned on some music for the walk to first period. I felt an arm brush against my shoulder. I looked out of the corner of my eye and saw Creeper there, staring at me with this weird grin. I moved away from him, and just like before, he moved right with me. He pulled my headphones off and started asking me for my number. When I told him no, he started begging, like he was trying to be cute. "Please, can I have your number? You're so pretty, I just want to be able to call you." I said nothing. Then he started asking if I had a boyfriend, and if that was why I wouldn't talk to him. I got to my class and hurried in, and he stood by the door, staring and grinning for a few seconds before he left. This went on for several weeks. He started turning up everywhere I went. I would even take detours to try and throw him off, but he eventually picked up on those as well. Every day, he would ask if I had a boyfriend and if I would just give him my number. After telling him no multiple times, I eventually gave up and just started giving him the cold shoulder. One afternoon, I was walking to the bus parking lot to catch my ride home when, suddenly, my headphones were tugged out of my ears, and lo and behold, there's Creeper. "You never gave me your number," he whined. I put my earbuds back in, only to have them yanked out again. "Why won't you give me your number? Come on, haven't I been nice to you?" I hopped on my bus and thanked the gods he didn't follow. That night, I got a text message from an unknown number. It said, "Hey," with a winky face. I asked who it was, and soon after, got the reply that it was Creeper. He then asked if I was a virgin. Now, I'm sitting here thinking, how did he get my cell phone number? I did have a Facebook and a MySpace, but neither one of them had my email or phone number visible to anyone but my friends. The next morning, I called the phone company and asked them to block his number so he couldn't contact me. The next day, I was walking between the two buildings of the high school on my way to a midday class, and he shows up again. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Why won't you message me back?" I told him I couldn't talk because I was going to be late for class and walked faster. He got upset and raised his voice a bit. "Why won't you answer my calls? I want you to be my girlfriend." I ignored him, and I guess he was tired of that because he got really angry. He ran up behind me, grabbed the handle of my backpack and the hood of my jacket with the same hand, and yanked me backwards. I reached forward and grabbed the handle of the heavy metal door of the next building. I was screaming at him at this point, "Let me go. Just leave me alone, okay?" He was still trying to pull me behind the building, and I was about to lose my grip on the door handle when, I guess, he realized that I'd created a scene. He let go and nervously said something along the lines of how he was just playing and to stop being so serious. After that, he would try to message me on Facebook once in a while, but I blocked him there too. Thankfully, I haven't heard from him since. This happened in 2005. My older brother and I lived with our single mom. I was a freshman in high school, and my brother was a senior. We had a pretty normal life. Our mom made good money as a lawyer, and my brother and I were happy. But one day, one of my mom's cases put our whole family in danger. My mom, being a lawyer, often prosecuted people in our city. In this case, she was prosecuting a man who had assaulted a woman. The man was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Little did we know, the son of this man went to the same high school as my brother and me. The family was very angry at my mother, especially the son, Kevin. He vowed to make my mom's life a living hell. My brother and I knew nothing about this, though. Our mom never talked about her work with us, and threats were nothing new for lawyers, so no one thought much of it. The day it happened was like any other. I, being a shy and introverted girl, always went to the bathroom when no one else was around. This was a mistake. Our school had walls made out of glass, so anyone in the classroom could see you walking through the hallway. I know, it's awful. Kevin must have seen me that day as I was walking to the bathroom. I was playing on my phone in one of the stalls when I heard the door crack open. Usually, I'd brush it off as another girl needing to fix her hair or use the bathroom, but this time, something felt off. A feeling of dread and fear welled up in me, and instinctively, I pulled my feet up off the ground. Then I heard him whisper my last name maliciously, and I knew it was a boy. The situation got worse quickly. He started banging on the stalls, slowly getting closer to mine. Now absolutely terrified, my mind raced with horrific thoughts of what he would do to me. Blinded by fear, I made a terrible decision to run past him towards the door. I jumped out of the stall and sprinted as fast as I could, but it didn't work. He cut me off and pushed me to the tile floor. What I saw when I looked up still haunts me to this day, Kevin standing above me, his face twisted into a vicious smile. I stood up meekly and took a step back. "What do you want?" I managed to whimper, my face now covered in tears. He didn't answer. He just took one intimidating step forward and pulled out a small knife. The next part is a blur. He said something about not screaming and tried to back me up against the wall. But I kicked, screamed, and punched, though I don't think it did much. I was a small, scrawny, 105-pound, 14-year-old girl, while he was a giant 17-year-old football player. I don't think I would have gotten away if it wasn't for the fact that we were in a bathroom. Two girls walked in amidst the chaos. Hearing their screams and Kevin's surprise, I managed to bite Kevin's hand and escape his grasp. I ran out of the bathroom, screaming and crying for help. My first thought was to run to my older brother's English class. I trudged down the hallway, but as my adrenaline started to fade, I realized another danger. I had a hole in my shoulder and lower stomach, gushing blood. I hadn't felt it at first, but it seemed that during our struggle, Kevin had stabbed me. Kids and teachers were now peering through the glass and stepping into the hallway. The two girls who had witnessed everything were screaming, drawing a crowd. My vision blurred and I felt lightheaded, likely from the blood loss. Luckily, I found my brother through the crowd. If I hadn't, I might not have survived. When I found him, I collapsed. My brother later told me that he yelled, "Help, my sister is bleeding." Teachers ran over, and students started calling 911 as my brother and a teacher tried to stop the bleeding. My brother, with his temper, started shouting and demanding to know who had done this. The girls said Kevin might still be in the bathroom, so my brother ran there. I wish he hadn't, though, because all the other kids followed him. Kevin hadn't moved, he was still standing near the wall, not even bothering to hide the knife. My brother tried to attack Kevin, but fortunately, classmates held him back. I was taken to the hospital. Kevin had damaged some organs when he stabbed me near my bladder, so I had to undergo immediate surgery with only a 40% chance of survival. They then put me in an induced coma because of the pain and to prevent me from ripping out the medical equipment. I survived, but I remained in the coma for a month. When I was brought out, my recovery was difficult, not just because of the physical trauma, but also because of the emotional scars of almost being killed. By the time I woke up, the school had covered up the incident, though rumors still spread among the students. I decided to recover at home for the rest of the school year. When I eventually returned to my daily life, things were never quite the same. My brother became overprotective, my mom quit her job, and Kevin was never seen again. I continue to have recurring nightmares about Kevin. Now that I'm an adult, things have settled down for our family. And you know what? Even though Kevin tried to kill me and put me in a coma, I hope he's figured himself out. He clearly needed help, and no one gave it to him. Kevin, if you hear this, answer me this: are you afraid of knives now? Because I'm afraid of bathrooms. I went to high school with a guy named Bob. Bob and I were never close, but we sometimes hung out in the same circle. He was in the band, and I was in drama. Bob was always a little off. I think he may have had a learning disability, which might have made him socially awkward. Anyway, during my sophomore year, he was dating a friend of mine, so I saw more of him. By junior year, he had dropped out and was trying to get his GED. That was the last I heard of Bob for a while. Fast forward to the summer, 2 years after graduating, Bob calls me out of the blue and asks if I want to go camping with him and a friend of his that I didn't know. He says he knows a spot that's totally secluded, and we would be hiking 5 miles a day. He really tries to sell me on it, insisting that it'll be awesome and fun, and that we'll bond. As I listen to him, I get this unsettling feeling deep in my stomach, like an instinct telling me, no, don't do this. Since I was never especially close to Bob and hadn't seen him in 2 years, I thought it was weird for him to call me out of the blue. I declined his offer. Then, in November of that year, Bob was on the news because he had killed his partner. He was working for an armored van service and had stolen the money from the armored van. The news kept giving updates about how he had fled the state. He was eventually caught during a routine traffic stop, I believe. When his case went to trial, his journal was entered into evidence. The prosecutor said that Bob had written about hatching a plan with his friend, the same one who was going to go camping with us, to become professional assassins. I believe the camping trip he invited me on was just a ruse so that he and his friend could get me into a secluded place to practice how to murder someone, namely, me. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.